Many people do not know, but the Bible says a lot about the origin and history of the Iranian people. The territory of present-day Iran, known in antiquity as Persia and earlier as Elam, is significantly mentioned in parts of biblical history during the Old Testament times. In fact, the history of the primitive Iranian peoples begins from the earliest records in the book of Genesis and extends through various notable periods, passing through the formation of great empires that directly interacted with the Israelites. Understanding the relationships between these peoples is important for interpreting many of the events described in the Old Testament, as well as their effects and consequences in history. In this video, we will seek to outline a brief historical panorama of who the ancient Iranians were in biblical times and what the true contact of this people was with the Israelites. We will also understand if, in some way, the origin of the Iranian people and their contact with the people of Israel are part of a prophetic and eschatological framework for the end times. Let's start this story from the Bronze Age until we finally reach Persian dominance, during and after the Babylonian exile. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 22, in the list of nations, Elam is mentioned as one of the descendants of Shem and became one of the first kingdoms established after the flood. This ancient kingdom, located east of the Tigris River, is mentioned several times in the scriptures, including the prophet Isaiah, who mentioned Elam in his prophecy as one of the places where God would recover the remnant of his people. Geographically, Elam occupied a region that today is part of southwestern Iran. This strategic location made Elam a center of culture and power in antiquity, with influences extending into Mesopotamia. Historically, Elam was both an adversary and an ally of various powers in the region, including the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Although direct interactions between Elam and the tribes of Israel are less documented, the kingdom of Elam was contemporary with the periods of the patriarchs and judges in Israel. The presence of Elamites is significantly observed as adversaries in battle accounts and as part of the empires that influenced the history of Israel. Moving a bit further in history, the strengthening of the Iranian peoples in the northwest occurred with the rise of the Median Empire. For some scholars, particularly based on materials from the historian Herodotus, it was between approximately the late 6th century BC and the mid-6th century that the unification of the Iranian tribes as a nation first occurred under the rule of Deoys, a semi-legendary figure generally credited with founding the Median dynasty and the Median Empire. Once in power, Deoys undertook the task of unifying the various Median tribes. He implemented a series of administrative and legal reforms, establishing a code of laws and a centralized government structure. These measures were essential in creating a common identity among the tribes, which previously operated quite autonomously and dispersed. Indeed, the unification of the Median tribes had a significant impact on the region, as it laid the foundations for the development of a more cohesive Median entity and for subsequent territorial expansion under kings like Seleucids and Asteids. But first, we also need to talk about the greatest power of the time, the Assyrian Empire. This empire is frequently mentioned in the Old Testament as an agent of divine judgment upon Israel and other nations. The Assyrian Empire was distinguished by its extraordinary military and administrative capacity, extending its dominion from Mesopotamia to Egypt. At its peak, its relationship with Israel was predominantly hostile, marked by campaigns that resulted in large deportations and an attempt to eradicate the Israelite identity. It was under the Assyrians that the kingdom of Israel fell, resulting in the exile of the 10 northern tribes. However, part of the Assyrian offensives also reached the Iranian plateau, intervening in territories belonging to the Medes. Nevertheless, by the end of the 6th century BC, the Assyrian Empire began to decline due to a series of internal problems, including power struggles, weakened administration, and continuous pressure from subjugated peoples. The Medes began to gain strength. Seleucus, king of the Medes, took advantage of the Assyrians' weakness to expand his territory and influence. The Medes eventually allied with the Babylonians, led by Nabopolassar, to put an end to the long years of Assyrian dominance in the region. Saqqara and Nabopolassar formed a strategic alliance that also included other Iranian groups, such as the Scythians and the Saka. These peoples shared a common interest in seeing the downfall of the Assyrians and were willing to collaborate to achieve this goal. The Scythians and Saka, for example, were known for their cavalry skills and guerrilla tactics, bringing a new dimension to the military capability of that alliance. The campaign against Syria was characterized by a series of decisive battles and prolonged sieges, but in 612 BC, the alliance achieved one of its greatest successes with the siege and destruction of Nineveh, the grand Assyrian capital. This event was foretold by the prophet Isaiah as an act of divine judgment. The fall of the city of Nineveh and the subsequent collapse of the Assyrian Empire paved the way for the rise of new powers. The Medes consolidated their control over much of Iran and adjacent areas, while Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar I established the Neo-Babylonian Empire as a major force in Mesopotamia. The rises of the Medes and Babylonians symbolized an important power transition in the region, directly influencing the political context in which the Jewish people found themselves. However, to continue the history of the Iranian peoples in the biblical narrative, we need to talk about the Neo-Babylonian Empire. After all, the prophet Isaiah also prophesied that the Medes would be instruments of God to destroy Babylon. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was primarily marked by the dominant figure of King Nebuchadnezzar I. This empire is widely known for its destruction of the city of Jerusalem in 586 BC, as documented in various historical and prophetic texts of the Old Testament. This event culminated in the destruction of Solomon's temple and the exile of the Jewish people, and it was a period of profound theological and cultural implications for Judah, described in detail in the book of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar imposed a policy of deportation and cultural assimilation aimed not only at punishing Judah, but also at integrating the Jews into the broader empire, diluting potential future resistances. Thus, the capture of Judah was not merely an act of conquest, but an attempt at a geopolitical and cultural reorganization of its vast imperial reach. During the Neo-Babylonian period, the Iranian peoples were experiencing a significant time of transition and rise. While the Babylonians focused on managing their empire and campaigns against Judah and other states, the Medes, to the north, were consolidating their power, having established a kingdom that would serve as the nucleus for a future alliance with the Persians. Under the leadership of Xerxes and later Astyages, the Medes organized a state that began to significantly influence regional politics. This phase was crucial for laying the groundwork for what would become the impressive Achaemenid Empire under Cyrus the Great, which would eventually absorb and succeed both Media and Babylon. The foundation of the Achaemenid Empire began precisely with the rise of Cyrus the Great, following the Persian revolt against the Medes that ended up subjugating the last Median king. Cyrus was a representative of the legendary Achaemenid dynasty and became notable for his diplomatic and military skills, traits that allowed him to rapidly expand his territory. The conquest of Babylon in 539 BC is one of Cyrus's most celebrated achievements. His army entered the city without facing significant resistance after a relatively short siege. The peaceful takeover of Babylon was crucial not only strategically, but also politically, as Cyrus promoted an image of liberator rather than conqueror. He allowed the exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their lands and rebuild their temples, a policy that secured him the loyalty of local populations and helped stabilize his vast empire. Thus, Cyrus became known for his policy of tolerance and restoration of subjugated peoples. This was a revolutionary approach for the time, contrasting with the practices of previous empires. In fact, many scholars view Cyrus as an almost messianic figure, whose actions aligned with prophecies that spoke of a return and restoration of God's people. In the book of Ezra, Cyrus's decision to allow the exiles to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple is seen as a direct response to God's call, reflecting a divine plan that encompasses not only the Jews, but also the integration of Iranians into the broader biblical context. Throughout their empire, the Achaemenids continued to expand their borders, covering a vast area that stretched from Asia Minor to Egypt, and from Central Asia to India. They implemented an effective administrative system that incorporated the diverse cultures and ethnicities under their rule, promoting an unprecedented cultural exchange in antiquity. This had a lasting effect on interactions among the peoples of the Middle East, laying the groundwork for commercial, cultural, and religious exchanges that would shape the future of the region. Therefore, the role of the Iranians in biblical history is not just a narrative of adversity and conflict, but also one of liberation, renewal, and cultural impact. Cyrus's commitment to allowing the return of exiles and the restoration of their religious traditions was an act that had profound spiritual repercussions for Jewish identity. This relationship between the Israelites and the Iranian peoples is not limited to the past. Today, it remains important to reflect on the continuity of these interactions throughout history, which have shaped contemporary societies. As we look towards prophecies and future events, the history of the Iranians in the Bible continues to be a topic of relevance. The narratives of reconciliation, restoration, and intercultural dialogue among peoples intertwine with the understanding of a more hopeful future. Thus, the origin of the Iranians in the Bible is not merely a fragment of the past, but a living promise that, even in the most difficult circumstances, there can be room for redemption and new beginnings. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep exploring the lesser-known stories of the Bible, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. And leave your comment below saying which story you'd like to see in the next videos. Your participation is super important for us to continue bringing this type of content. See you in the next video.